Hello, hello, and welcome to our first video in quite a while. This one is on our Middle West vocabulary terms. About a month and a half ago, we did our knowledge rating, where you looked at each of the words from a list of about 40 and rated how well you knew them. And from the results of that, I made a list of 20 words from the Midwest unit. The list of those words is on your Google Classroom, which is what we're looking at right now. It's my view, so yours looks a little bit different, but it's pretty much the same. So the Midwest vocabulary Google Doc is there waiting for you. You have already received, or you very soon will receive, the paper copy of the list, which will have the terms and the definitions. And there's also a copy of the Google Slides, which I'm about to take you through. So if you want to look through this on your own, you're more than welcome. You can click on this. And when you do, it will open up like this. If you just click on Present, you can just kind of scroll through at your own pace and look at the definitions and the pictures and everything else. So here's our cover page, and this is a pretty good view of what the Midwest would look like. A lot of agriculture, flat land, farming. We see a lot of that throughout the Midwest. So the first term we'll take a look at is the frontier, which is the beginning of unexplored land. So what we define as a frontier changes over time. So as the United States acquired more and more territory, what we call the frontier changed. During the Revolutionary War, places like Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, that would have been considered the frontiers. On the other side of the Appalachian Mountains, it was kind of far away. It was hard to get to. After we had taken over this territory and won the American Revolution, when Thomas Jefferson was president, he made the Louisiana Purchase from France, and he acquired a lot of territory. St. Louis and Clark out, we'll talk more about them. The Search Institute was out there, and they came back with a full report. They went all the way out to the Pacific Ocean. They came back, and then you started seeing more and more pioneers make their way across the frontiers, set up settlements, and then eventually all these territories eventually became states as more and more people moved there. So we'll talk more about pioneers in just a little bit. Our next term is the prairie, which is the frontier that a lot of these pioneers were moving across. This is flat or gently rolling land that is covered with grasses and wildflowers. Pretty much the same thing as a plain, except as we know, plains could also be coastal plains, which would be more sand. The prairies were flat lands with some hills that had grasses and wildflowers and stuff like that. Fertile, which we talked about when we talked about the winter room. This is soil that is able to produce good crops. The reason why the Midwest has so much agriculture is because the soil in the Midwest, especially in the central plains or the interior lowlands, is really, really good. Lots of nutrients, lots of other things the plants like, vitamins and things like that. The Great Plains is not quite as good. The soil is a little bit drier. The crops don't grow quite as well, but there's still a lot of agriculture in the Great Plains as well. If you remember in the winter room, Wayne and Eldon's dad tastes the soil for some reason and says it tastes good, so therefore it's going to grow good crops. I don't know about that because I'm not about to go tasting soil, but I'll take his word for it. Add to that is livestock, which are animals that are raised on farms, such as cattle. It could also be pigs and poultry, which is a term for birds like chickens and turkeys and ducks and stuff like that. But usually livestock refers to cows who are staring at you in a kind of creepy way. Stock, if you're a salesperson, is something that you sell, whether you own a store or a farm or whatever. If your stock happens to be alive, you have livestock, and that's what the cows are in this picture. By cows. Speaking of cows, in a slightly different form, meat packing, which is a very big industry in the Midwest. This is preparing meat for sale. A lot of the big cities like Chicago and Milwaukee in the Midwest were centers of meat packing because they were pretty close to where they were raising the animals. Just to show how it became part of the culture, this is a football team that was made up of guys who worked for a company called the Acme Meat Packing Factory, which was in Wisconsin. Their team eventually became known as the Green Bay Packers, and I don't like them because they beat my favorite team twice a year, every year. More on them later. The assembly line, which you talked a little bit about with the Northeast, this is when you're making a product and it's a bunch of guys and ladies working on a line and they're assembling different parts of our product. We see it a little bit in the 1800s. We really see it used a lot more when making cars in Detroit, Michigan. So these three guys are uh, doing a different job on the car, whether it's putting the wheels and the tires on, adjusting the lug nuts. Seems like the guy who's sitting down is adjusting something on the steering column or the dashboard. And when they're done working on that car, there's another car right behind them, and they'll do the same exact job over and over and over again. But it allowed companies to make products, especially cars, much, much quicker and therefore make them much, much cheaper. And it's a little bit different process now. It's more robotic, but there are still people involved to either design the robots, operate the robots, repair the robots, but a lot of the work now is done through computers. Transportation hub, and this is something we see a lot in the Midwest. It's a city that is the center of moving goods and people. I realize that there's a repeat there where it says as a center twice. I'll fix that. But places like Chicago, which is a big city right in the middle of the country. This is O'Hare Airport in Chicago, which is one of the busiest airports in the whole country. If you're flying from the East Coast to the West Coast, these cities are natural stopping points because they're right in the middle. Now, people fly to Chicago and places like Minneapolis and Minnesota and Milwaukee and Wisconsin and Cleveland and Ohio for business and that sort of thing, but it's also just a natural place for planes to stop and drop passengers off and connect flights to different parts of the country. So Chicago's O'Hare Airport is one of the biggest in the whole country, which is what makes it a transportation hub. Sod, which is a mixture of dirt and roots of grass. We see that a lot in our area because of the fact that there are so many new neighborhoods and new developments that they're putting grass down. So if you see like giant rolls of grass, that's also sod. Sometimes it comes in squares. They've resodded our backfield a couple times because it gets torn up pretty well. But back in pioneer times, sod was something very different. It was actually a building material. This house that we're looking at is actually built out of dirt and grass and mud. And the reason for that is the fact that when you don't have a lot of wood in the Great Plains, there were not a lot of trees. This was the building material they had. So they built these houses made out of dirt and grass and mud. Not exactly the best living conditions, but this one's actually pretty well constructed. There are a lot of drawbacks, obviously, to living in a house made of dirt and grass and mud, like, for example, if it rains. But all things considered, this one's pretty good. To live in a sod house and to be a pioneer, you had to be self-sufficient, which means you're doing everything necessary to take care of yourself to survive. Believe it or not, this house is actually made out of sod. This is a remarkably good house for being made out of dirt and grass and mud. But to be self-sufficient, you had to be able to find food, you had to be able to find shelter, water, basically take care of your basic needs just to stay alive because you couldn't go down to Walmart or Target or a grocery store or Home Depot or Lowe's because those places wouldn't be there for about another 100 years or so. So you had to really take care of yourself with what was around you. A combine, which I think was mentioned in the winter room, this is a machine that was pulled by horses for cutting and threshing grain. Cutting grain is obvious, it cuts the grain. But threshing is when they pull the seed out of the grain to grow more grain. So a combine did both of these things. This is a modern combine that's being driven by one person. The truck is being driven by a second person. This is an example of what we call mechanized agriculture, which is farming that's done by machines. Canning is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's putting stuff in cans, putting food, mostly fruits and vegetables, cans or jars. Here's some fruit in jars. I think people did it with meats also, which kind of sounds gross to me, but that's okay. This is also mentioned in the winter room when it talks about the mother using some canned raspberries to make some sort of drink when they go to have their picnic by the lake. And this is something that a lot of pioneers did, and we still do. We just seal them and sell them in grocery stores now. Lake effect. This is the effect that the Great Lakes have on the people in the climate who live near them in the Middle West. So near the Great Lakes, there are 5 of them. There's a lot of big cities that are near the Great Lakes, but the Great Lakes have a really strange weather system that can just, in the wintertime, just drop tons of snow in a very short period of time because of the fact that the Great Lakes affect the environment. So here's Chicago. This is Wrigley Field, whether you this sounds weird to say, world champion Chicago Cubs play. There will be no ball game at Wrigley Field on that day because there's tons and tons of lake effect snow moving through Chicago. It doesn't only affect snow, it also has wind, which is extremely fierce in Chicago, which is why they call it the Windy City. You can see the snow is pretty much moving sideways, but it also has other weird things like fog, which just kind of appears out of nowhere. This is a pretty famous NFL playoff game between the Chicago Bears and the Philadelphia Eagles. If you're having a hard time making out the players, there's a reason for that, and that's because a giant patch of fog just sat over the stadium. Uh, the players could hardly see what they were doing. The fans couldn't see anything. The TV viewers couldn't see anything. The color commentators couldn't see anything. They were trying to describe what was going on, but they had no idea. They somehow finished the whole game, and if you care, the Bears won 20-12. Open pit mining, which is exactly what Luckstone does. This is a method of removing iron deposits close to the surface of the ground using power shovels. And you saw what the tools they use in the 21st century. This is from 1905. This is a steam-powered shovel that is being used to dig into the ground and get iron ore deposits from a mine in Minnesota. Something called reclamation is when they are turning one of these open pit mines into something after it has been done being mined, which is actually what they're going to do with Luckstone as well. So this was an open pit mine, this picture here, that they actually turned into a lake when they were done extracting iron ore from it. So the plan for Luckstone is actually to do the same thing. So they're basically reclaiming the land, which is why they call it reclamation, by not using it for mining anymore, but they turn it into a body of water. A flatboat is a boat that's flat. That's why it's called a flatboat. They were used mostly by pioneers on the 1800s. It was much easier and quicker to travel by water if you could, so they would try to follow the rivers for as long as they could. And the flatboats were seen especially on the Ohio River, which was used quite a bit. They couldn't go on the rivers forever, so a lot of the pioneers used Conestoga wagons, which are these big wooden vehicles that were basically like moving trucks in the 1800s. They would throw all their stuff in there, and they were pulled by horses or oxen. And if you want to see this wagon, it's in Washington, D.C. It's actually in the National Museum for American History, the Smithsonian Museum in D.C. Agribusiness is exactly what it sounds like. It's a combination of agriculture and business, and this is a farm or ranch which is combined with other businesses. So if you grow crops or raise animals and then you, on your farm, turn them into frozen vegetables or popcorn or burger patties, whatever, you have an agribusiness. And a pioneer is a person who leads the way. These are the people who are moving out west, going across the frontier, settling those places in the Midwest and beyond. This is a painting we're going to take a very close look at because there's so many small, tiny details, which we'll talk more about. Take a look at the people who were in there, what they're doing, including the giant angel-like person who's flying across the country in the middle of the painting. It's called American Progress, and we'll talk more about that over the course of this unit. Mass production is a review word. We talked about that with the Lowell Mills. That's when you're making large numbers of a product, whether it's textiles or cars or anything else really. And our second review term is tributary, and this is when a smaller river combines with a larger river, and this giant red mass in the middle of the country is actually showing all the rivers that eventually dump into the Mississippi, which is quite a bit. There's a whole bunch of other Midwest terms. Unfortunately, specialized got cut off down there at the bottom, but you can see it on your list and also on this presentation if you choose to watch it. Take a look at these. There's some that I didn't think we really need to know, like the old farming tools. Some that we already knew, at least most of us, which is tornado and blizzard and iron and TP. So take a look at those. And then the last two, which are review terms, were subsistence farming and commercial farming. To show me that you watched this video, in the comments for this video, I want you to answer this question. Are they subsistence farmers or commercial farmers? Talking about the family that is in the Winter Room by Gary Paulsen. We just finished this. What do you think they were? And there's no right or wrong answer necessarily. There's some evidence that kind of supports either the fact that they're subsistence farmers or commercial farmers. But tell me in the comments section and include some story details that tell me why you felt that way. And finally, our test is going to be again on Wednesday, January 25th. This will not include the other terms. So long for now.